For years, Donald Trump relied on the same strategy when dealing with allies. Threaten first, create uncertainty, force concessions through pressure. He used tariffs, public confrontations, and economic intimidation as political tools, believing that chaos itself could be turned into leverage. And for many countries, this approach worked. Governments around the world chose the easy path. They made deals that suited Trump. They accepted unfavorable terms. They backed down quietly to avoid prolonged conflict. South Korea adjusted its trade agreements under pressure. Mexico accepted tougher immigration enforcement. European countries softened their positions on NATO spending. Japan made concessions on agricultural imports. The pattern was consistent. Trump threatened. Countries panicked. Deals were made. Trump won. The formula was simple and brutal. Deploy tariffs without warning. Make threats on social media. Demand immediate responses. And watch as governments scrambled to give Trump what he wanted before the situation escalated further. The strategy depended on one essential factor: fear. Fear of economic damage. Fear of market instability. Fear of losing access to the American market. And most importantly, fear of Trump's unpredictability. No one knew what he would do next. That uncertainty became his greatest weapon. Governments made preemptive concessions just to reduce the risk of Trump's next move. But then came Canada and Mark Carney, and everything changed. Because for the first time in Trump's second term, a major ally refused to play by these rules. Canada did not panic. Canada did not make preemptive concessions. Canada did not accept unfavorable terms to buy temporary peace. Instead, Canada held its ground, protected its key interests, and refused to abandon long-term priorities in exchange for short-term calm. Mark Carney looked at Trump's pressure campaign and said no. Not today, not tomorrow, not ever. And now, the consequences of that decision are becoming increasingly clear. Across North America and beyond, officials, investors, and policymakers are recognizing that Trump's pressure campaign against Canada failed, and that Mark Carney's approach has become a practical model for resisting political intimidation. While Trump relied on confrontation and unpredictability, Mark Carney focused on preparation and institutional strength. Long before tensions escalated, Canada began reinforcing its economic and political foundations. This was not a reactive scramble. This was deliberate, strategic planning executed over months and years. Trade relationships were diversified. Domestic infrastructure was strengthened. Supply chains were secured. Regulatory systems were modernized. Institutional resilience became a central priority. So, when external pressure arrived, Canada did not scramble for emergency solutions. It remained stable, confident, and strategically consistent. That stability was not accidental. It was deliberately constructed over time. Carney understood something fundamental that other leaders missed. Trump's chaos strategy only works if you respond with chaos. If you panic, he wins. If you make desperate deals, he wins. If you publicly show weakness, he wins. But if you remain calm, move deliberately, and reduce uncertainty wherever possible, the pressure loses its power. Canada refused to give Trump the emotional reactions he needed. No panic, no desperation, no public displays of submission, just steady institutional resilience. Legal frameworks were strengthened, diplomatic channels remained open, economic contingency plans were activated quietly and professionally. Canada was ready for whatever Trump threw at it. As pressure intensified, most countries adjusted their positions to reduce immediate risk. They softened their stances, they accepted compromises, they prioritized short-term relief over long-term leverage. Canada did not follow that pattern. Instead, it held its ground. Despite sustained pressure, Canada was able to preserve its trade framework with the United States. Markets remained open. Investment continued. Supply chains continued to function. The predicted collapse never materialized. Why? Because intimidation alone proved insufficient. Trump needed Canada to believe his threats were existential. But Canada knew better. Canada had prepared for this. And when Trump's pressure campaign arrived, Canada absorbed it without breaking. The institutions held, the economy held, Canadian sovereignty held. Trump's playbook, which had worked so many times before, suddenly stopped working, and that changed everything. One Canadian political analyst described Carney's Davos speech perfectly. It feels as though Carney has punched the shark in the nose. Now everyone's waiting to see when the shark is going to come back and try to bite him. The Davos speech was not an accident. It was not an emotional outburst. And it was a calculated message delivered on the world stage at precisely the right moment. Carney warned that the world is in the midst of a rupture, not a transition. He condemned great powers using economic integration as weapons, tariffs as leverage, and supply chains as vulnerabilities to be exploited. He never mentioned Trump by name. He didn't have to. Everyone knew exactly who he was talking about, and the world responded with a standing ovation. Because finally, a major leader had said what so many others were thinking, but were too afraid to say. Trump's reaction was immediate and revealing. He lashed out publicly, saying, "Canada lives because of the United States. Remember that, Mark, the next time you make your statements." He withdrew Canada's invitation to join his Board of Peace. He threatened 100% tariffs. He tried to humiliate Carney by calling him Governor Carney instead of Prime Minister. Every move was designed to punish Canada for daring to resist. But here's what Trump didn't understand. The more aggressively he reacted, the more he proved Carney's point. Trump's threats only reinforced the message that great powers use coercion when they can't get voluntary cooperation. And crucially, Canada held firm. Carney did not apologize. He did not walk back his remarks, despite Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent's false claim that he had. Instead, Carney doubled down. To be absolutely clear, and I said this to the president, I meant what I said in Davos. That statement alone was revolutionary, because it showed other countries that you can stand up to Trump and survive. You can refuse his demands and your economy will not collapse. You can maintain your sovereignty and still preserve market access. Carney punched the shark in the nose, and the shark, for all its thrashing, could not bite back effectively. What unfolded between Canada and the United States is now being studied carefully by governments, investors, and trade negotiators around the world. They are examining how Canada absorbed sustained pressure without escalating tensions, how it maintained access without submission, how it preserved sovereignty without isolating itself. Canada's response has become a reference point in modern economic diplomacy, not because it generated headlines, but because it delivered results. And here's what makes this so significant. Canada is the only country that hasn't really embraced everything and given Trump the deal that he wants. And Canada still has the world's best trade deal with the United States, with USMCA. That's the lesson the world is learning. Resistance works, preparation works, institutional strength works. European leaders are watching closely, asking themselves if they can replicate Canada's approach. Asian economies are studying how Canada diversified its trade relationships without triggering American retaliation. Smaller nations are realizing that they don't have to accept whatever terms Trump dictates. There is another path, and Mark Carney has shown them what it looks like. One of the most enduring consequences of Trump's approach has been the gradual erosion of institutional trust. Trust is the foundation of modern trade and diplomacy. Once it weakens, businesses hesitate, allies diversify, and partnerships become more fragile. Canada has adjusted accordingly. It no longer approaches the relationship with automatic confidence. It operates on calculation, preparation, and strategic awareness. But here's the critical point. While Canada's trust in America declined, the world's trust in Canada increased. Stability became Canada's advantage. Reliability became its currency. When Trump made American partnerships unpredictable and risky, Canada became more attractive as a partner. Investors who once automatically chose American markets started looking north. Companies that relied entirely on American supply chains began diversifying into Canada. Countries that trusted American leadership unconditionally started building relationships with Ottawa. Trump intended to weaken Canada. Instead, he elevated it. By attacking Canada so aggressively and failing to break it, Trump inadvertently proved that Canada is stronger, more resilient, and more trustworthy than he ever imagined. The Canada-US relationship has changed and will not go back to what it was, at least for a very long time, if ever. Those words, spoken by a Canadian official, capture the permanent transformation that has occurred. For decades, the two countries were deeply integrated economically, politically, and institutionally. They built products together, shared supply chains, and designed entire industries around cooperation and mutual dependence. That integration was once celebrated as a strength. Today, it is increasingly treated as a vulnerability. America First has replaced partnership. Nationalism has replaced coordination, and long-standing trust has been replaced by strategic caution. Trump believed that by pressuring Canada, he would force compliance. Instead, he produced independence. He believed intimidation would bring control. Instead, it encouraged diversification. He believed chaos would weaken Canada. Instead, it strengthened Canadian institutions. Every threat Trump made, every tariff he imposed, every insult he delivered, pushed Canada further away from dependence on the United States and closer to self-reliance. The irony is devastating. Trump set out to make America more dominant. He ended up making America more isolated. While he was busy threatening Canada, Canada was quietly building alliances with Europe, Asia, Latin America, and yes, even China. While Trump was insulting Mark Carney, Carney was signing 12 new trade deals on 4 continents in 6 months. Trump was impressed, he later admitted, but by then it was too late. This story is not simply about tariffs or trade agreements. It is about power, strategy, and institutional resilience. Donald Trump believed pressure would force compliance. Instead, it produced resistance. Mark Carney did not defeat Trump through confrontation. He did so through preparation, patience, and strong institutions. Canada did not shout, threaten, or escalate. It remained focused, disciplined, and consistent. As a result, governments around the world are now studying this response. They are learning that effective leadership does not require chaos. It requires credibility, coherence, and long-term planning. Trump damaged one of the world's most respected bilateral relationships. He weakened trust and reduced American influence. And in the end, he achieved the opposite of what he intended. Because when the pressure stopped working, Canada was still standing, and Trump was standing alone.